missed you, friends.
It's been a little while.
It's been a little while.
You know, the end of the year is typically a crazy time for everybody.
I know.
And when you have a pandemic year, it is so far beyond crazy. So, you know, even when you would have a regular schedule and do things on, you know, with routine, sometimes things just get in the way.
I know. Then you had to go have all these other kind of issues.
I
So
know.
they
Nearly
interrupted.
dying and just...
But
that wasn't
you
exactly
didn't.
part of my plan for the fall.
No, I think that we're getting used to doing things that aren't in the plan.
Yep, we've all become improvisers, right? We kind of
Flexible.
navigate.
Flexible.
Yeah, I'm so flexible. The back of my head's touching the back of my feet. This is how we have to operate. Actually, I'm not that flexible. I have to go back to the hospital if I do something like that. But I'm just saying, look, the world is crazy and it's out of control. But we have to remember that when the world is out of control, God is still in control.
Yep.
Amen?
Right. Faith is stronger than politics. Truth is stronger than politics.
Well,
God, who created the system of government, is stronger than politics.
people have to remember that. We kind of forget God created government. He created systems of authority. And he's stronger than these crazy politics. So we have to keep things in mind. Politics are not our salvation, people.
Nope. And they're obviously not going to save us from illness. They're not going to save us from duress.
Nope.
They're not going to save us from changes in our lives.
Nope.
There's only one thing that's going to keep us steady.
And that's God. He is the constant. When everything else is always like fluctuating like crazy, he is the constant. So we have to keep that in mind.
Yep.
And so, you know, as husband and wife, we know about the daily crazy stuff of life.
Right.
And like homeschooling. And we have to keep in mind that there is a constant out there.
There is a constant, and Christ is the constant.
In
His
here.
truth is always the truth. He's always steady. He never gets shaken.
Yeah. And we do.
We do.
In fact, actually, just reading an amazing verse about being shaken, and it reminds me of that time when we were being sued by the NAACP and that song by, what is it, Building 429?
Yeah.
You know, I will not be shaken. Oh my
Right.
gosh.
It probably came from this verse. Hebrews 12:28-29 is what I was reading to earlier. It says, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, the kingdom that we're receiving cannot be shaken. How good is that? Let us be thankful. And so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. There is nothing that shakes him. And our inheritance is to be part of a kingdom, to be co-heirs with Christ, reigning in a kingdom where he will never be shaken. Things in that kingdom will never be shaken.
Come on.
So right now we're seeing that everything that can be shaken is being shaken.
Every last part of it.
We are really being tested from all different sides. And at the end of the day, we need to be thankful, which is awesome because we're in a month where that's where we should be concentrating on being thankful. And it says, be thankful because you get to take part in a kingdom that will never be shaken.
Yeah.
And that just sound so good in a time when we feel like externally we are being shook up.
It's true. But you know what I love you touched on? You touched on being co-heirs with Christ. You touched on inheritance.
Yes.
And this month, November, is
Yes.
National Adoption Month.
Yes.
And we are slightly partial to adoption here at the Radiance Foundation. And we love talking about adoption. Of course, we're adoptive parents. That explains it. I'm an adoptee. And we love what adoption does. In fact, I was recently on Fox Soul, which is a very interesting network. It's created by, Fox TV network.
Yeah.
And I was on the late night show, Tammy Mack, and we were talking about adoption.
Yeah.
There were 4 panelists, and as crazy as some of the shows can be on that network, I love the fact that Tammy Mack respects everybody who's on her show.
She does.
She, she may not agree with you, but she unlike any other late night talk show host, she completely respects everybody, allows everybody to speak, and it's an interesting experience. But
Yeah.
I love that I was able to talk about adoption and foster care. And what was interesting, the first panelist started it off saying that the kids are in foster care particularly black children, are in foster care because of, drum roll please, white supremacy.
Deep sigh.
I know. I was like, well, we're starting it that way? Okay. So my response was, well, okay, hold on. Let me understand this. The foster care system, which is comprised mostly of white children, 46% of children in the foster care system are white. So are they there because of white supremacy? How does that work?
Doesn't.
It doesn't. But this is why it's so important for us to understand the context of things. 21% of children in the foster care system are black. And yes, it is disproportionate to the percentage in the population. Yes. But 18% of children who are adopted are black. And that almost matches the number that are in the system. 50% of children who are adopted are white. And 20% of Hispanic children who are in the system, 20% are adopted. So it closely matches. The reason why actually less black children are adopted is because of kinship care.
Right.
And that actually is because of a certain form of supremacy, but it's not white supremacy. It's because there are those who don't believe black children should ever be adopted by white people, ever.
Right. And so just to clarify, kinship care really means that if a child is in the foster care system, they will go to the nearest of kin,
Right.
regardless of the situation that kin is in.
Right.
Just regardless of their ability to provide, their ability to help that child be more successful, because they're saying that the bloodline trumps the ability to be in a family that is set up for success.
Right. And then that family could be a white family, could be a mixed family, could be a black family. But the issue is, and I understand this, they want to keep that child in the family. And I understand
Right.
that.
And it's
that
not
is a laudable goal.
a bad thing. And there are a lot of folks who are caring for their quote unquote kin. It's such a
Right.
funny word. It's not natural, but because we don't use it in day-to-day chatting, but there are a lot that are doing it and doing it well.
Right. But there are, unfortunately, more situations where there's failure. That's why the Government Accountability Office attributed kinship care as the largest reason for the failure of black children to be able to be adopted as quickly, because they return back to the foster care system. And the other thing about the whole accusation of white supremacy, it's like you're negating the reality that the reason why children go into the foster care system through no fault of their own is because of abuse and neglect.
Right.
And so you want to talk about supremacy. Yeah, there's a certain kind of supremacy. It's ideological supremacy that believes that somehow the government is a better substitute for
Right.
fathers. Or is a substitute for fathers. There is a fatherlessness epidemic. And so when you have fathers who leave the home, you have vulnerable families. Children who grow up without a father in the home are 5 times more likely to live in poverty.
Wow. And
so poverty is the leading cause of children going into the foster care system, because the abuse and the neglect tend to follow that. And so the other fact that, if I wasn't so exhausted that night, because it was a midnight show, I would have gone into some of these things, but children who grow up in single female-led homes are 8 to 10 times more likely to be abused or neglected than children who grow up in a married, intact home with a mother and a father. So don't blame white supremacy. There are personal decisions that are made. There are circumstances. Yes, there are some historical circumstances that contribute, but in large part, to just blame white supremacy, it doesn't get to the heart of the issue, particularly when you talk about fatherlessness. You can't blame fatherlessness on white supremacy, but you can blame it on political supremacy.
Right.
Embracing an ideology, a political ideology that is so destructive on so many levels. So there's just so much that when we talk about adoption, we talk about foster care, there's so much to dig into. And one of the resources we have is adoptedandloved.com, where we have lots of memes, we have fact sheets, we have articles, we have videos, we have some of our previous podcasts about adoption. Definitely check it out, adoptedandloved.com. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because you just recently spoke at an adoption conference with our friend Callie Jett, and let's talk about adoption. But one of the radio show hosts who was a panelist on this show that I was on Fox Soul, Jasmine Sanders, talked about her trauma. Now, her adoption experience wasn't the same as mine. The majority of adoption experiences are very positive. In fact, 90% of adopted children have a positive view and feelings about their adoption.
Where'd you get that stat?
This is from the Department of Health and Human Services. In fact, it's on one of our fact sheets called Adoption Mythbusters.
Right.
81% of adoptive parents report having a warm and very close relationship with their children. So that's the majority. But that does not negate those who don't have the positive experience. And Jasmine was one of those. And so she was kind of defining her life by the trauma.
Right.
And I find that there is this movement that kind of wants to center everything on trauma. And I'm not negating that there is trauma. I have 12 other siblings. 9 other siblings in my family were adopted, and adopted out of really horrific circumstances. I'm not negating the trauma at all. But there are times when I feel like there's almost such a focus on trauma that we don't realize that there's also transformation.
Yeah, that's true. And the reality is that something has broken down somewhere in a system, which opened up the door for there to be a need for redemption. God, in his awesomeness, really created a system where adoption allows repairing of brokenness.
Yes.
So we're not saying that there's not brokenness, and we're not negating the fact that adoption, when you walk through adoptions, that there are many issues that people are going to have to deal with. I always laugh because I have biological kids that I have to walk through things with. So trauma is part of life, but God transforms, and he never gets tired of transforming. And
Amen.
Yes, we're broken, but we don't have to remain in a broken place. Right. And we also have to be careful that when we acknowledge things that have created brokenness in our own lives, that isn't a place where we want to camp out and stay and find our identity in the brokenness. Right. We find our identity when we understand brokenness and we realize that we are more than overcomers through Jesus Christ. And as we invite him into those different areas, he transforms us. We become new creatures, new creations. 2 Corinthians 5:17, we all know that. It says, therefore, yes, if anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. The old has gone and the new is here. And a lot of therapies want us to stay in a place of trauma. Yeah. They talk about the trauma, they camp out around the trauma, they build houses around the trauma. Seriously. Right? They say, okay, let's talk and let's do an hour session and let's just keep talking about the trauma. And actually what happens psychologically is that we continually re-traumatize ourselves because we relive the trauma. But the Holy Spirit says, don't camp out there. Understand what you've walked through. Allow that to frame why you are where you are right now, but don't stop. Take the knowledge of Christ, the knowledge of who you were created to be, and how that brokenness has been prepared, and move forward.
Right.
He's a God of perpetual forward motion. He never stops allowing us to move forward. And I think a lot of times when we camp out at the trauma, we stop moving forward. And we don't ever want that to happen.
Yeah. It just reminds me of a song I listened to years and years ago as a kid. It's from BB and CeCe Winans. Yeah. And the part of the song said, know that I am God and I'm able to change your nature.
Wow.
And that song has never left my mind, because if we don't believe that God can change our nature, that there cannot, if we don't believe that there is healing,
right?
The song, healing in his wings, healing in his voice, healing in his word. If we don't believe that, then we are prone to staying in that place. I could have stayed in that place of brokenness all of my life, but we have to make choices that, you know what, this was my past, and it certainly is part of who I was, but this is who I am. And that, for me, and looking at so many people who have overcome just the seemingly insurmountable, the impossible, whether you're talking about drug addiction or someone who was in sex trafficking, a victim of sex trafficking, and they talk about their transformation. I mean, it is an ongoing process, but there's a lot of talk in adoption circles about trauma, and it really concerns me, because we have to believe that there is a transitional sort of thing that happens and a transformational sort of thing that happens.
Yes. And when we look at 2 Corinthians 5:17, which talks about becoming a new creation in Christ, only a few verses later, 2 Corinthians 5:20, it says, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors. So he makes us new people so that we can keep moving forward and represent him. It says, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. He's like, look, I want to change you and make you whole because I love you so much that even though you've walked through things and you've experienced trauma, when I make you whole, I want you to still be my ambassador. I want you. I've chosen you to be my representative.
Right. I mean, he chose Paul. He chose Paul, who was a murderous freak. I mean, Here he transformed someone who could have lived in the trauma of all the pain that he caused other people,
right?
But instead became such a powerful apostle, became a servant of God because he embraced that transformation. God can transform anybody. Hey, when we come back, we're going to talk about being thankful. Mm-hmm. More than ever, we need these holidays to inspire love, joy, and peace. So
we got it. We'll talk more about that when we come back.
Life has purpose.
The Radiance Foundation illuminates that every human life has purpose. We educate hundreds of thousands about crucial social issues, and we motivate people to positive action.
Truth won't take a vacation. That's why we need your generous donation. Tax deductible, stuff is acceptable. Your gifts make illumination possible. Truth won't take a vacation. And here's our little explanation. Defending human dignity never ends. That's why we depend on you, my friend.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. I like it. You better shine, people.
go to radiance.life/donate to make your tax-deductible donation. Thank you for supporting our life-affirming work.
My name is Justice Bomberger, and I'm thankful for my family.
My name is Aaliyah Bomberger, and I'm thankful for my friends.
I'm Makai Bomberger, and I'm thankful for the freedom of religion.
My name is Radiance Bomberger, and I'm thankful for all the promises God has kept.
Hey, welcome back, friends. You know, when we left you right before that little break, that awesome break.
Oh, those kids are so adorable. Whose kids are they?
That's awesome.
We do everything in house. When we talk about doing things in house, we literally are doing things in house. Just so you know.
Someday we'll look back and we'll laugh about how much was accomplished at this location.
People just don't know.
Yeah, but we were talking about trauma. We were talking about walking through trauma. We were talking about, honestly, when we think of 2020, I think a lot of people are going to think trauma.
The year of trauma.
Yeah, so it's synonymous with the word trauma. But there is a way out of feeling as though you're in trauma all the time. And the Bible tells us, and not just the Bible, but psychologists reiterate this, that one way to walk out of trauma is to have an attitude of gratitude.
That sounds like something that a parent tells a child just so the child shuts up.
I know, but the reality is that gratitude actually changes your brain, honey. It changes your body, and it does this for the better. It's awesome. It is amazing that God created, there's the verse that says, I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise, right? The way to get into a place where we're abiding in the presence, how do we get there? He tells us, have an attitude of gratitude in the midst of all the crazy. When you realize that what happens in your body when you are thankful, it actually improves your physical health. People who practice being thankful have really live longer, have less aches and pains, and report feeling healthier than people who tend to be miserable and tend to complain about everything. It actually, when you are thankful, there is a reduction in toxic emotions.
Right.
Envy, resentment can't reside where there's thankfulness.
So you mean to tell me that God knew what he was talking about in his word?
Is it funny? Like we talk about it because it does sound like a soundbite, have an attitude of gratitude. But he was like, look, I created your body. I created your system.
Right.
And when it says that he's our wonderful counselor, he's taking us from one place to another by literally changing the chemical makeup of our brain. And how do we do that? By practicing thankfulness.
Well, I'm thankful for you.
Hashtag heart melting.
It's true. I cannot imagine life without you.
I know. And I think back to all that we've been able to accomplish together.
Oh my gosh.
And it's far more than what I ever could have accomplished alone.
I'm just saying, that's God knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing
I
when he's
know.
weaving together things, weaving together people, weaving together situations. And, you know, I remember when we first started the Radiance Foundation, we wanted to talk about one of our foundational issues, which is adoption, of course. And
Right.
we had a campaign.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Our campaign, which was thanks for the number 4,
Right.
giving life.
Thanks for giving me life. That took us up like the East Coast. We went to
Oh,
a
yeah.
few different churches.
Right. Our small mini tour of churches.
Oh, but hold on. In a
Oh, no.
in a minivan. And see, minivans are not made for normal sized people.
Well, normal sized people who are trying to stay in the van while
Oh my
changing
gosh.
diapers.
My back was killing me. I mean, you couldn't stand up. And then, you know, you had two kids in diapers who are apparently their bladders and whatever else were not synchronized. It was freezing. Do you remember that? It was
I do.
freezing.
And I do remember that we had all of the things that we needed to set up a small exhibit booth that included a Christmas tree with ornaments that we had
Charlie
made.
Brown. Wah, wah, wah. It was.
We had pack and plays. We had bought that thing that goes on top of the van from our neighbor.
Yeah.
That black sports
Cargo
cargo.
thingamajiggy.
We had invested in a roof rack so that we could put things up there.
Oh my gosh.
We had pack and plays and strollers and suitcases and clothing because, of course, we're doing this mini tour, so you have to look put together when you're when you're
Don't
speaking.
ever pull the curtain and see the behind the scenes.
Oh my gosh.
It
Okay,
was
that
crazy,
was-
but that was such an amazing just start. That was actually our first campaign for the Radiance Foundation.
Yes, you're right. It was 2009. You're right. It was our first campaign because it's always been our heart to talk about the gift of life. You know, and always been our heart to say, thank you for giving me life.
Yeah.
And I remember that we were on that small mini tour of churches and we ended at your family's longtime church and you were able to share your family's incredible story of adoption.
Yeah. It was the first time actually I was able to, as far as represent the Radiance Foundation, be able to share my story and have my family sitting
Right.
there in the audience, which was really neat. And longtime friends, people who we'd grown up with, who actually didn't know much of the story of the Bomberger family and adoption. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. So when you think of that phrase, thanks for giving me life, I'm going to throw the ball back into your court. What does that mean to you?
well, first, I think of the creator of life, of God who gave me life, that gives each and every one of us life. I wasn't humanly planned at all, but there was a divine plan in my existence in this world.
Amen.
You know, I think of my birth mom. I think of the horrific experience she had to go through as a victim of rape. As someone in the military, she could have chosen to get what they called at the time a therapeutic abortion. That was actually allowable during that year's time that she was pregnant with me. But she didn't choose that. She did courageously choose life and gave me the gift of adoption. So thanks for giving me life. As far as the human side of things, starts with her. It really does. And then, of course, you know, thanks for giving me life. It wasn't just that she gave me this gift of adoption and my parents were like, hey, we're good. No, they're the pro-lifers who care about children after they're born. And they loved me through all these years and nurtured me and instilled in me this incredible faith in God, their love for Jesus. And that's why I am who I am. So thanks for giving me life. Yeah, my birth mom. Thank you for being birth mom strong. I know so many birth parents are forgotten when we talk about adoption, but I'll never forget my birth mom. I've never met her. Just so listeners who are tuned in right now, I've never met her, but I pray to God that one day I will be able to just meet her face to face. I meet a lot of birth moms in events that we do. That's really hard. There have been several that stand out to me where there were birth moms who would be about the age of my birth mother, and they reached out and they've hugged me after hearing my presentation, and it's almost like. In fact, I remember several times there have been birth moms who say, "Do you mind if I just kind of stand in for your birth mom?" So. Thanks for giving me life. It has so many, so many powerful elements to it. But I thank God for my life. I thank my birth mom. I thank my parents. And not only that, girl, you give me life. Every day. It's just, you make me more than one I ever thought I could be. But you make me more in so many different ways. You definitely make me better. And sometimes... I might resist, hashtag resist, but
Hashtag eventually listen to your wife.
If only, I wouldn't have been in that. Well, I wouldn't have been in several situations with my health.
It's okay.
Husbands, this is a public service announcement. When your wife is speaking and she's speaking some truth, well, I just want to say,
where's my hanky?
I'm serious. Listen. And because she has your best interest at heart, unless your relationship is really bad and she hates you, but that's a whole other issue. And we'll have that counseling issue in show number 21.
Maybe. But I think about your birth mom, and she didn't know at the time, but she was giving you to me. You were the gift that I needed. Babe, I need you. And this is really what adoption does. It gives a gift we didn't know how deeply we needed. And so many times people say, "Oh, great, you guys are adoptive parents. You've really rescued, I'm sure that child is so grateful." And we go, "What? We're better people."
Yes.
We're better people for walking through each of these situations.
Yeah.
There's so much fruit and so much beauty that comes from courageous choices.
Yes. And it's not just the courage of the birth mom. It's also the courage of the family walking into the unknown,
Yes.
And I want to refer back to a remark you made earlier about biological children. We don't know what's going to happen with our own biological children. I think some people talk about when they hear about the unknown of adoption, life is unknown. But there's something so courageous about saying, I'm going to love you, even if it's a newborn child. I was adopted or not adopted, but I brought into the family at 6 weeks of age and then adopted about a year later. But even with foster children, teens, you don't know and fully understand that background. You don't know what their trajectory is, but God placed you there to change that trajectory.
Yeah, and that's actually why there's, I believe, so much warfare when it comes to adoption, because you touched on this earlier, so I'm just going to give like a second of returning back to the fact that we have the potential to be co-heirs with Jesus Christ. So there is so much warfare tied to adoption because there's an enemy that will never have that opportunity.
Right.
And so he lives his life with a heart to destroy, to steal, to erase the identity of Jesus Christ in each of us.
Right.
And as we walk through the joys and the struggles of adoption and the things that are difficult and the things that are wonderful, what we're doing is we're winning the battle over the enemy, and we're actually placing ourselves into a position to speak into the soul of another human and prayerfully open up opportunities for them to invite Jesus into their heart so that they can be a co-heir and they can actually, find and feel the benefits of the inheritance that they have here on earth and in the years to come.
Yeah.
And for all of eternity.
Right. And I just want to remind people too that adoption is the essence of salvation. Ephesians 1:5, he predestined us to, sonship through Jesus Christ, through adoption.
Yeah.
This is how we become part of the family of God. And this is critical for Christians to understand, that this adoption, God created in the supernatural for us to model in the natural.
Yeah.
And this is what happens. And it takes what was broken,
right,
and brings transformation so that there can be breakthrough. I thank God that I never would have thought that my life would have been centered around me being able to share my story of adoption, my story of brokenness, my story of being supposedly unwanted, and conveying that to people in these massive events.
Right.
And touching people in ways I never would expect. I wouldn't expect former gang members to come up and be crying because my story touched them. I would think, well, I obviously was never in a gang. I mean, but who knows me? I never grew up that way. Although, when you have a family of 13 kids, there is the natural formation of gangs. And typically it was 12 kids against me. I'm still healing from that. But anyway, you never know how God's going to use that stuff, that vulnerability. And it's really a powerful thing. I love, as adoptive parents and as an adoptee, we're able to kind of see this full circle sort of thing. When it comes to adoption, I just want to throw out these numbers just so people understand. We're looking at 2014 was the latest year where we see total national adoption numbers, and it's 110,373 adoptions. Now, you compare that in that same year in 2014, there were over 926,000 abortions. Come on, America.
That's one adopted for every 9 aborted.
That is so far beyond.
As Christians, it shouldn't
tragic.
be okay.
No, not at all.
We don't have the luxury of sitting back, hearing that stat and being like, that's too bad. No. My heart's pricked.
Yeah. We should be moved. We should be stirred. There should be inner turmoil. Why should any child, for instance, ever age out of the foster care system? That should never happen. There are over 16,000 precious teenagers who age out of the foster care system and never, oh my gosh, this breaks my heart, who never have the opportunity to call somebody mom or dad. This should not happen. And the other thing, I just want to talk about these numbers, because I'm a factivist and I love these numbers and I love the personal stories too. But there is no national federal database of numbers for adoption. In fact, that was done away with back in 1992. The federal government had the National Center for Social Statistics, but they wiped that out. And so we don't even know.
You said adoption, but there's no federal law mandating abortion reporting.
Right. So
either.
neither.
Right. Both sides of this.
How crazy is that? So we don't know how many children are being saved and rescued through adoption, and we don't know how many children, I hate to even say, how many children are killed through abortion because there's no federal mandate. We have to do better than this.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And it's enough to know that over 926,000 abortions in 2014, without there being that federal mandate, for abortion centers to only voluntarily have to give their numbers.
Right.
It just goes to show to me, the point is that number is probably lower than actual stats.
Right.
And yet, even if our adoption number is somewhere in the ballpark, regardless of how you look at it, regardless of the reporting, there is an absolute chasm between the two that shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. And where we get the numbers, the 110,373 adoptions in 2014, it's actually from the National Adoption Council, which is adoptioncouncil.org. And they do these studies every few years to pull together stats from all these different sources. In fact, we'll link to the National Adoption Council's 2014 report in the show number 17 block at lifehaspurpose.com.
That's good. At the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, there really are so many things to be thankful for.
Yes.
And ultimately, adoption is something huge to be thankful for in our house.
Yes.
With 2 of our 4 kiddos adopted.
Well.
Both adoptions happened on 7/11/11.
Oh my
so
gosh.
we'll never forget that date. My
Never.
sister-in-law always says 7/11/11, a date from heaven. And she's right.
We love you, Jax.
Yeah, we love you, Jax. Shout out. In the Fulton County Courthouse, when we lived down there in downtown, when we lived in Atlanta, I know that you've heard us say this before. At 10 a.m., we finalized one adoption upstairs, then moved to a different floor at 2 p.m. to finalize the second adoption. Both were just the fruition of a very long journey. And every day of our life, we are grateful for God who stepped in and in the natural just showed himself in each of these situations. And we're so full of thankfulness to a God who steps in the supernatural in our own life and adopts us. And adoption means to choose for oneself freely. So when you were talking about the verse in Ephesians, when he uses the word adoption, Paul does, to talk about our relationship, it's because we have a God who chooses for himself me and you. Deuteronomy 7:7 says he set his affection upon us.
Yes.
And so we are so thankful that in a world that's really going to hell, that we have a Savior that pursues us and that loves us and never gets tired of that.
Life has purpose.
Hi, I'm Justice. Hi, I'm Justice too.
Hi, I'm Joseph, and I'm pro-life because every life has a reason.
I'm pro-life because everybody is wonderfully made.
I'm pro-life because God made us special.
Woohoo! Yeah!
Yeah!
That's what I'm talking about.
ProLifeKids.com!
Every week, Ryan's articles appear on various news outlets. Each week, we'll feature one of his latest commentaries. It's time for some fearless factivism.
Adopted and loved. November is National Adoption Month. But what is adoption? We often hear about it, particularly as one of two alternatives to the injustice of abortion. Millions of us are the recipients of this incredible gift, where our birth parents or birth parent turned the unplanned into a loving plan. Yet there are still so many misconceptions about it. I was adopted as a baby, united with my family when I was 6 weeks old. 9 of my other 12 siblings were adopted as newborns, as toddlers, and as teens out of the foster care system. Adoption happens because of brokenness. In the natural and the supernatural, this courageous act of love and selfishness helps to bring healing, hope, and wholeness. It was God's plan to reconcile us to himself, as evidenced in Ephesians 1:4-5. For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship or daughtership through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will. There is no salvation without adoption. None. So Christians especially should understand adoption in a deeply spiritual and personal way. Adoption is the essence of salvation. In the natural, we shouldn't think of it as a last resort. Sometimes it should be the first resort. But the way we understand adoption skews the way we apply it in our society. Perhaps it explains why there were only 110,373 adoptions in 2014, the latest year reported on page 37 by the National Council for Adoption, or NCFA. Yet 926,200 abortions that same year. Total adoption numbers reached their apex in 1970, pre-Roe, where there were 175,000 adoptions. Since then, adoption numbers have never risen to that level. In 2007, there were 133,737 adoptions. Over the course of 7 years, they've tragically plummeted by over 23,000. Part of the decline is due to a reduction in international adoptions, but the fact remains that over 862,000 abortions were committed in 2017. You cannot adopt those who are aborted. The most recent foster care stats revealed that out of the 122,000 foster children available for adoption in September 29, there were about 66,000 adopted. By the end of the year, there were still over 71,000 precious, vulnerable children waiting to be adopted out of the foster care system. As a nation, we must do better. So much better. No child should languish in foster care. No mother should feel that the violence of abortion isn't even an option. Our pregnancy centers and all the incredible frontline work they do to protect mothers, fathers, and their children aren't enough to create a culture that values life and encourages adoption. Our churches must do a better job leading in the defense of life at its most vulnerable in what the book of James declares as pure religion, which is, quote, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless as this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world, end quote. Although the United States is not engaged in a militaristic war within our borders, we have a cultural and spiritual war that has caused more casualties than all of our military wars combined. There have been over 62 million killed since abortion was legalized in this country. Roe v. Wade never empowered women. It empowers men to have sex and run. This has led to a massive culture of abandonment where women are effectively left behind as widows and children in the womb are orphaned by both the absent father and the mother who has chosen to give in to the distress caused by pro-abortion propaganda. The pollution of this world is the warped belief system that others, not the author of life, can determine your worth. We allow our minds and hearts to be polluted by the lie that we aren't created with purpose and that we can't be stronger than our circumstances. I don't know about you, but I serve the God of the impossible. I'm living proof of the impossible becoming possible. My birth mom was raped, yet bravely rejected the violence of abortion, choosing life and adoption instead. Philippians 4:13 proclaims, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Yes, the same Christ who was humanly unplanned. In fact, I was recently struck as I read Matthew 1:1-16 about the birth of Christ. I've read this so many times throughout my life, but something profound happened to me this time. It's not Mary's genealogy that is detailed in the opening chapter. It is the genealogy of the man who would become Jesus' adoptive father, Joseph. Christ's lineage was drawn from a man who was not genetically tied to him at all. The paradigm of adoption was revealed in a courageous teen mother with a humanly unplanned pregnancy, certainly divinely planned, who braved a crazed king trying to kill her child, a father who chose to love rather than to leave, and a savior who would sacrifice himself in order to offer redemption, adoption, and transformation to those who confess and believe. Adoption is courageous and messy and joyful and mysterious and loving. We need to uplift all of those in this beautiful triad: the birth mom, birth dad, the adoptee, and the adoptive family. No one's pretending it's easy. Parenting biological children isn't easy, unless I missed the memo that genetically related children present no problems in life. I loved my adoption journey, as do the majority of adoptees. I'm loved just as much as my parents' first 3 homemade children. I love being an adoptive father. Out of my 4 children, 2 were also adopted, and all 4 of my kiddos are loved like crazy. Yes, I'm using the word love a lot. No other word suffices. Adoption doesn't just change the child. It changes the family, the community, and sometimes the world. Look at the late CEO of Apple, Steve Jobs. He was adopted and loved too, and he, inarguably, changed the world. This November and every month, may we rethink false narratives on adoption. May we look at this act for what it is: transformative love. I'm a firm believer that there's always a plan in the unplanned. What we don't see from a human perspective, God knows from a divine perspective. We're meant to be, regardless of the circumstances of our conception, regardless of our real or perceived abilities or disabilities, regardless of what others think we contribute to this world. We have equal and irrevocable worth simply because we exist. And adoption is a powerful and culture-changing way to unleash that God-given purpose. Bomberger, and you're listening to the Life Has Purpose podcast. You can find this op-ed at radiance.life/adopted and loved. And you can read more of our op-eds at radiance.life/news. I know there are so many stories in your heart of thankfulness. You know,
Yeah.
there are so many things. And sometimes we don't need tragedy to bring out those stories of thankfulness. We can think of 2020 and we talk about the trauma, and sometimes we joke about how this crazy roller coaster ride that 2020 has been. But you know what? There have been a lot of moments of our humanity rising above, of meeting crazy challenges, of the most beautiful parts of our humanity coming out. I know it's easy to focus on the negative, crazy stuff that's happened, but there have been many beautiful moments.
Yeah.
And so beyond 2020, we want to invite you to tell us your stories. Give us some stories of why you're thankful. We would love to share those stories.
Yeah, we would love to hear them.
On the
They
next show.
encourage us.
Yeah.
And we love to have the opportunity to go through those stories, pick a couple to share with our Life Has Purpose audience, because this is what we need. We need to encourage each other.
Yeah.
And what's good and what is right in a time where the culture is crooked and perverse.
Right. And that's why we are so excited about our end of the year campaign.
Yay.
My Bethany, my beautiful Bethany, came up with this idea. I love this. It's actually called A Thrill of Hope. And obviously it's from that song, Oh Holy Night. Yeah. And it's exactly what we need, because we need this thrill of hope. And I'm going to capitalize that H, because that hope is Christ.
Yes.
And a weary world rejoices. But there was a part of that song that you brought up, babe, that hit us differently. You said, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. Oh my word. I never read it that way, the way that you just brought it out. The soul felt its worth when he appeared.
Yeah. Shoot.
See, our worth is in nothing temporal here, people.
Yeah.
Isn't a God who created us, who loves us, who knows our intrinsic and inherent worth, our irrevocable worth. But wow, we feel that's why when you're worshiping and God's presence comes into that room, there is such a different perspective on things. You know that song, when he walks into the room, everything changes. Oh my word.
Yeah.
So, Thrill of Hope, that's going to be our end of the year campaign.
Yeah, so
I love
share
it.
your stories of hope with us. What's a story of overcoming this past year? We want to hear. We want to celebrate with you. We want to have a praise party this week. Our Thanksgiving is just going to be full of times to remembering how thankful, it was significant that there were memorial stones that the Israelites were taken from one place to another, right? All throughout the Bible, we see places where there was established memorial stones so that whenever people walked by those areas, that it would never be forgotten, the goodness of the Lord.
So send some of your memorial stones our way.
You
Go to
could
lifehaspurpose.com.
Yep.
And just fill out the feedback form. We would love to share some of those stories in the next show. So until then, from our family to yours,
thank you.
From the Radiance Foundation to every listener, happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And may the God who supplies all of our needs richly bless you this holiday season.
Much love.
Whatever may come your way, no matter what people say, your life has purpose. Sometimes it's hard to see that you have a destiny. Your life has purpose.
Hey, we'd love to know what you think of the podcast. Go to lifehaspurpose.com and give us your feedback.
You can also listen and download our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or SoundCloud.
Remember, whatever may come your way,
And no matter what people say,
your life has purpose.